Hey folks, welcome back. So in this video, I'm answering another email, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this because it's a really big email, but basically, Dag, I love your YouTube channel. Can you please explain how much the MSL2 costs to build and break it down by your different components like motors, ESC, batteries, your radio equipment, anything that you had to weld, etc., etc. So I'm going to do that in this video. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you don't know me, I've been in model aviation since the late 70s, flying radio control. My obsession in the last 11 or 12 years have been what I have coined the phrase ginormous scale model electric aircraft. And that means it's got to be 150 inches bigger. As a kid, I probably wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, but I had really poor grades in high school and actually found out at the end of my sophomore year that I had dyslexia. So I gave up any idea of going to college by that time. And over my life, I have learned to design my own airframes. And I think I do a pretty kick-ass job doing it. So before I get too far into this, I do want to do a shout out to my sponsor, RTL Fasteners. If you need bolts, nuts, blind nuts, lock nuts, nylocks, metric standard, if you need servo screws, go to rtlfasteners.com, see what they've got. If you buy more than $50 a product and you use code DA30, you'll get 30% off that order. Okay, it's a really great deal. So spend more than $50, use code DA30, and you'll get 30% off that order. So to talk about the MSL2, I want to start with the MSL1 first. So the MSL1 was my first, what I call ginormous scale airplane, 197-inch wing. Originally it was going to be a gas engine, and I'm going to get into the differences between gas and electric when I was developing some of my airplanes. I'm going to break that down to actually the watts of how many horsepower, or how many watts is in a horsepower, or how many horsepower is in a watts. How many watts it equals to make a horsepower. But this airplane, I wanted to build absolutely cheap. So I bought materials from the hardware store to strip my own lumber, which was 2x4s and 1x4s pine. And the ribs in it were really heavy because it was from a shipping crate plywood. This airplane weighed 71 pounds. And I'm going to talk in a minute about the AMA over 55 rule, why some of this matters, okay? But this plane was the first large power system I had to buy. 150 kV electric motor. The batteries was 10S2P, 160 amp speed controller. All of that lived in this airplane, and I don't have unlimited funds, so all of the power went from this airplane into this airplane called my MSL2. 181 inch span, 61 pounds, 98 watts per pound, cube wing loading of 5.2. Now I want you to remember a couple of things I'm talking about here. Number one is the weight, 61 pounds. With that 150 kV motor at 6,000 watts, it's about 68 watts per pound. Okay, remember these things if you can. And then that cube wing loading of 5.2. If you don't understand cube wing loading, this is somewhere between a trainer and a park flyer as far as wing loading. This airplane is almost like a glider as far as the way that the wing load is loaded. So when we talk about the power system I have here, some people will have a stroke when they see these numbers, but you're going to see in a minute there's a lot of other options out there, okay? So 150 kV Hacker motor is around 750 bucks, at least the one I bought. My speed controller around 275, 160 amp speed controller. The batteries are the big holy crap moment every 4 to 5 years, because I only get about 300 to 350 flights on my batteries before the internal resistance goes through the ceiling. And I've already done 2 videos about internal resistance on your LiPo. It looks like I'm going to have to do a third one because I've got trolls coming out of the woodwork trying to explain how it works. And quite frankly, the way they're explaining it isn't the way it worked for me. So I'm going to try to do an even dumber version of how internal resistance works in the airplanes I have, because my airplanes are pulling massive amps on takeoff. And when you pull massive amps on a battery, if you have high internal resistance, it creates a lot of heat. It messes with your capacity. The best way to know if your batteries are any good is put a maximum amp load on it and see if your voltage drops. but I'm going to do a whole nother video on that again to try to make internal resistance for dummies video, okay? So let's break down just for a minute my hacker. And I'm going to talk about some numbers here, and these are kind of just general numbers, okay? Some of these your mileage may vary if you actually take a hacker A100-10, put it on the workbench, and hook up all your scopes and stuff. I might be off a tenth or two, okay? But I'm trying to just help share knowledge here. So my hacker A100, 150 kV motor, at 10 S2P it pulls 6,000 watts on takeoff. The reason I don't have 12 S2P is because my speed controller, which is 160 amps, would see about 171 amps with 12 S2P, and it would burn up my speed controller over time. So that's the reason I'm 10 S2P. 1 horsepower is approximately 746 watts. So 6,000 watts is 8.04 horsepower ballpark, okay? I turn a 3210 prop, that gives me that 6,000 watts. My fuselage is 22-inch diameter on the plane. So if I had a small diameter prop, it'd look just stupid. Have you seen some of the GBs out there where the propeller is barely bigger than the fuselage? That's because gas engines have a fundamental problem with torque. And I'm going to show you that. It's the first time I've ever shared that. So this is my hacker setup, okay? I want you to look at the bottom though, my RPMs. I only need about 5,000 RPM to fly this plane comfortably. Why? I have such a light cube wing loading, and the plane's clean. This plane stalls at 18 miles an hour. Its cruise speed is about 48 miles an hour. Okay, this is a scale flying airplane. It's not aerobatic. So let's talk about a gas engine for a minute. And I used to fly 3W engines in my half-scale biplanes and stuff, and some of my other planes. This is a 3W110. 110cc engine. It's going to cost you about $1,000 or $1,100. It's 10.73 horsepower. It's got more horsepower and more watts than my hacker. But look at the size propellers it will turn. It will only turn a 2612 or a 2810 or a 38. Maximum RPM is 8,500 RPM, but most of the time they're in that 6,000 or 7,000 RPM range. But gas engines fundamentally have a hard time with torque. Electric motors, that's the reason I fly electric, everybody. I'm not trying to save the world. I'm not trying to save seals from being doused in oil in the oceans. I am flying electric because pure and simple reliability and a huge amount of torque to that propeller. Okay, so let's say I wanted to turn a 32-inch prop like I do with a gas engine. I would most likely have to go up to a 17 horsepower gas engine for $1,800 to turn anything in that 32 to 33 inch. But I would be at 13,000 watts versus my 6,000. I'd be at 217 watts per pound. I would almost guarantee you if I had this kind of horsepower in this airplane, I would pull the wings off it. This airplane is designed as a scale flying airplane, not a yank and bank. I'm an epileptic airplane freaking out in the sky. It is a scale flying airplane. If you've ever seen it fly, I fly it extremely scale. So electric, there's so, and I've done videos on learning and understanding electric, but electric is kick-ass because of the torque you get to turn a big propeller. But there are some other options out there, and I haven't experimented with this yet, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But I want to throw this out there. If you go to eBay, there's a company called T-Motor, and they've got some really neat stuff out there, which I'm going to buy and test and then tell you what happens, but it's probably not going to be until next summer because I'm trying to finish an ultralight right now, and I'm trying to finish my big transport that I'll talk about in a minute. Okay? But the reality here is that there are options out there for big power systems if we experiment. Now, my biggest problem with this electric motor right here is I'd have to use my lathe and probably turn my own prop adapter to be able to turn the 32 or 34 inch diameter prop I'd want to turn. I love at the bottom it says compatible with skateboards, robotics, whatever other means, airplanes, boats, watercraft, helicopters, industrial service vehicles, quadcopters, multicopters, tanks, and military vehicles. I love the tanks and military vehicles. You can find anything on eBay, folks. So now we're going to talk about the other kind of half of the power system. We talked about the motor, ESC, and batteries. Now we're going to talk about the radio. And this is a holy crap moment too. Now, I'm flying a $200 receiver because I love telemetry in my airplane. I love to hear what my voltage of my flight pack is, what my receiver packs is. I love to know my altitude, my airspeed. I love telemetry. So I voluntarily spent $200 on a receiver. You don't have to put a $200 receiver in this airplane. But the servos, and this is where there is a weird moment in aviation experience with over 55-pound airplanes. So the AMA has the large model aircraft program, which means if you're over 55 pounds, you have to go through a program to prove that your airplane is airworthy. One of the things in that program is you have to prove that the servos are big enough to move your ailerons, your elevator, and your rudder. There's actually a mathematical formula in there where you figure it out. So the servos I use are $179 each. I have 5 of them in there, so I have $900 worth of servos. I know that sounds like a boatload of money, and it is a boatload of money. But here's a fact. If you use 2 or 3 smaller servos and they're $60 each, you're still going to be about $180 per flying surface. But if you're going to be in that over 55, and just so you know, you can go 55 pounds up to around 77 pounds. I think it's 2 ounces or 7 ounces. And you are the person who inspects that airplane. Then you have to do a test flight in front of either an AMA inspector or a contest director, and then they have to sign off. You send your paperwork in the AMA, you get a really cool card with a picture of your airplane, and you're good for 3 years. If you're over that 77 pound 2 ounces or at 77 pounds 7 ounces, you have to have an AMA inspector inspect your airplane, witness you do 3 takeoff and landings. Then they send in the paperwork. You send in the paperwork once they sign it all, and then you're good for 3 years with your card. But if you're going to fly over 55 pounds, you got to prove you got enough torque in your servos to move the flying surfaces. Okay, so all up, my flying my power system for my airplane is about $2,600. Okay, now if you think about somebody flying a gasser this big, it's going to be kind of close because a gas engine is still $1,000 or $1,200, where I'm paying $750 for my electric motor. You're still going to have an ESC. But here's a fact, and I know this upsets people when I say this. I've heard so many times, oh, you fly electric because it's cheaper, right? And I'm like, what's cheap about electric? Oh, well, you're not buying gas. Folks, electrics are, I don't want to say insanely expensive when you get to my airplane size level, but they're insanely expensive. Okay, you're going to buy a $1,000 generator. You're going to buy $500 in chargers. You're going to plow through a gallon of gas or 2 gallons of gas a day with your generator just running and spewing out all that carbon. So electrics are not cheaper than gas, okay? I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. Whoever said that, maybe on a little park flyer, hey, you might be right, okay? Maybe even on one of the ARFs that are a 60 size ARF, it might be cheaper than if you had a 60 size glow fuel, because of all the glow fuel you're going to buy at $17 or $18 or $20 a gallon, whatever it is nowadays. I haven't bought glow fuel in 25 years. So the thing is when you get into ginormous scale, 150 inches and bigger, electric's freaking expensive, okay? And like I said, those batteries every 4 or 5 years, you're going to replace those because the internal resistance gets too high for them to make good batteries. Now, those batteries might go off and live in a glider or a Cub or somewhere else, but they don't have the current draw to fly my giant airplanes after about 4 years. So every 4 to 5 years, I have to be ready to spend $500, okay? Now let's talk about the airframe. And I'm going to be really, really kind of stuck up and arrogant for a minute. This is the greatest airframe I've ever designed so far, and I've designed a lot, but I love this airframe. It's just clean, it's light. I'll get into the materials in a minute, but this is just a kind of like a big Gillows kit, a little bit more complicated, but the fuselage is 95% balsa wood and a little bit of plywood and some carbon fiber, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The wings are actually the Wings 2.0. Wings 1.0 was a big steaming pile of reeking disaster turd. The first wings were just horrible for this airplane. And I am going to do an entire video series on the building of this airplane. I've had many people say it. I've been reluctant because I'm just so busy with everything else I'm doing in life. But these wings, Wing 2.0 turned out just absolutely fabulous. Lighter than, I mean, just unbelievable. Almost all balsa wood. The ribs are plywood from aircraft spruce, but the spars are all balsa wood with carbon fiber toe on them. The shear webbing's all balsa wood. everything's balsa wood except a little bit of light plywood from aircraft spruce. Some other pictures of the wings. So let's break this down for the airframe, okay? Lots of balsa wood, a little bit of light plywood, carbon fiber tubing for the spar, carbon fiber toe to reinforce balsa wood spars, tight bond glue, which I love with balsa, greatest glue in the world. The landing gear is 4130 chrome moly that I TIG welded up myself. The brakes are 3D printed brake housings with 6061 T6 aluminum brake linings and 2 high torque servos to actuate them. I have independent brakes on this plane so I can pivot it on one wheel. It's really super sexy. But here was another holy crap moment in the building of this airplane. I have done so much testing, and you may have seen it in my other videos, but when you glass an airplane and paint it, it adds weight, no matter how good of a builder you are. I don't care how good of a builder you are. The moment you put glass on a balsa wood, that balsa wood becomes a sponge and will soak up that resin. So and I've experimented with 1 square foot pieces of all kinds of different balsa wood, all kinds of different weight of glass cloth, thinning the epoxy with denatured alcohol. I've done all this like 15 years ago. Monaco is lighter, no matter what. Now people will say, oh, well, Monaco is not as strong. I don't know about that. I did some very basic testing on 3/4 ounce glass cloth, and Monaco is just as strong, okay, in sheer strength. Now, Monaco isn't cheap. I had 3 30-foot rolls of Monaco. It cost $265 to Monaco this airplane. If you want to paint Monaco, it works really good by taking and masking off where you don't want your overspray to go. Take 600 grit sandpaper, wet sand the Monaco until it looks flat. Wipe it off dry, let it dry usually 24 hours. Then take denatured alcohol and clean that area. Let that dry an hour, and then spray as you normally would. I use the canned Krylon on this plane, and it looks great. 3D printed engine in the front, which is a 2-row, 18-cylinder, fake-looking radial. Everybody says it's really cool looking. I think it looks real. About $165 in ABS, some chrome tubing, fake spark plug wires, and other things. A friend of mine, though, his name is Berger de la Pena, built the control module for my exhaust pipe light. So if you've ever seen the MSL2 flying at the fly-in, you see that the exhaust pipes have basically what looks like flames burping out of the exhaust. That's done with high-powered LEDs that are using like mag flashlights, and his controller firing MOSFETs. So that is a really cool part of this airplane, but I got to give a shout out to my friend Berger, because he is my mad scientist that designs all my control systems for ancillary stuff. Okay, so all in all, I have about $3,500 in my MSL2. Okay, a couple of years ago, a guy offered me $8,000 for it, and I wouldn't sell it because I love the plane too much, and I had already sold the B-36 and sold the C-130. And I didn't want to sell another plane. I ran out of money a couple of times in the hobby and needed funds, so I sold a couple of airframes. I built a couple of airframes for people. I've got my Patreon, my YouTube, and a little bit of sponsorship that helps me bring in money to afford to do all of this, because by no means am I rich. My wife clearly keeps my what we call real life separated from my model airplane life, and if model airplane life can't kind of self-support itself, I'm crap out of luck. But I want to tell you another hard reality about flying ginormous scale airplanes. So to my friend that reached out and said, how much did the MSL cost? $3,553 to get it into the air. That does not include my transmitter. That includes basically a bind and fly ready airplane. Okay? But there's some other things you have to be prepared for. And this is a reality of flying giant scale or ginormous scale airplanes. You are going to need a trailer. Now, I lucked into my trailer because I used to have a big flatbed that I'd carry buggies and motorcycles on when my family was into going to the buggy park and riding dirt bikes and buggies. When they all grew up and I had that flatbed, and if you know me, I'm a little OCD. I keep all my stuff looking pristine like new. So when I was looking at trailers, I asked the guy, would you take a trade-in with a flatbed? And he goes, probably not. Most of them look like people's drove in bulldozers up and down them. I said, well, mine looks pretty clean. He goes, well, bring it up here and let me look at it. So I showed it to him, and he's like, holy cow, this thing looks brand new. I'll give you $4,000 trade-in. Blew my mind, everybody, because I was going to spend like $6,800 on a new box trailer. So I was like, I won the lotto, the fact that this guy was going to give me such a great trade-in. So I bought my trailer. But the trailer is only the first piece of taking in a ginormous airplane to the flying field. Okay? I had to buy a $250 tent, and I modified it so I could pull the two poles out, front poles out during the day, and basically have a 20-foot wide hangar that I can roll my plane in and out of. It's not, and I know there's rumors out there that it takes an hour to put these big airplanes together. That's BS. It takes me 10 minutes to put this airplane together and get it ready to fly. Literally 10 minutes. If I've got my batteries already charged, which I don't, I never leave my batteries charged, but if I had them already charged, I could have that airplane in the air in less than 10 minutes. But here's the reality. Once I get to a fly-in, I turn my trailer into my FBO, my flight base of operations. I've got my chargers inside there. I've got all my hardware in there. I have a table, a couple of chairs. I got my coolers with all of my non-alcoholic drinks. You know, I've got all of my stuff in that trailer that for me to shove the airplane back in there, if I'm going to be at a fly-in for 2 or 3 days or a week, it just doesn't work. So I need to have a place to put my airplane outside the trailer once I get set up. Another thing that doesn't hurt is make sure you got a garage big enough to set your airplane up, because when you're checking the CG, when you're checking out all the systems and you're getting that last, to me, the last 10% of an airplane is the hardest part. That first 90% can just go really, really quick. I got to be careful when I say really quick. It normally takes me 3 years to get a ginormous airplane from the drawing board to the point I'm ready to do a maiden flight. It's normally a 3-year period. That's another reason I can stretch the money out over 3 years. For me to spend $2,600 on a power system all at once ain't going to happen. Number one, I normally can't save that much money from all my ancillary things I'm bringing in money with. And my wife and I have an agreement that I'm not going to touch, money for our mortgage or my daughter's college for the hobby. Okay. So you need to have a garage. So you really need to have these 3 things if you're going to fly ginormous scale airplanes. So here's the MSL-2 at a big AMA fly-in up at the headquarters in Muncie, Indiana. And I love to do one wheel touch and goes. I love to fly down the runway in a slip. You can kind of see I've got the controls cross-controlled a little bit. I'm dropping my left wing, but I've got a little bit of right rudder in it. This plane is so fun to fly, folks. I never imagined maybe being able to sell it, but next year may be the year that it gets sold. The reason why is I'm finishing up a transport plane, 220-inch wingspan, it has leading edge slats. It had, leading edge devices, because somebody says, well, they're not slats unless they're on tracks. Who gives a flying, who cares? It has drooping leading edges, leading edge devices, folks, okay? Has massive spoilers on the wings, little bitty ailerons. It is my Frankenstein of all Frankenstein's designs I've ever done in my life. It's got 2 big nacelles on the wings with 2 engines pulling as tractors and 2 engines pushing. Like I said, an 8-foot long cargo bay. We figured out we can buy those Teletubbies from Amazon and drop 240 of those going across the sky at one time. If this plane flies, okay, and it's a big if, because this is the craziest thing I've ever designed. If that plane flies, it will become my new love for the next 3 or 4 years, which means the MSL-2 will most likely be grounded and go into my storage unit. And if somebody's offered me $8,000 for that airplane at that moment, it will probably get sold. And I'll tell you why. If you want to build airplanes and sell them, you can actually fund your hobby. I'll tell you how. So when I built the B-36, it was 95% done, getting ready for final paint, and a gentleman offered to buy it. I said no. He told me how much. I said, I'll help you put it in your trailer. It was one of the hardest things I ever did, taking an airplane of this size and scale, with all the people who followed me along on RC groups and on my Facebook. When they found out I sold it, I know there were a lot of people that were heartbroken, but not as heartbroken as me. But I was out of money. I'd spent over $10,000 over 7 years on this airplane. And I recouped that money when I sold it. And it reinvigorated my funding for building all the cool things I do. The C-130 was the same thing. It was actually it was actually painted. It was done. It was ready for taxi testing when I sold it. It went to a pal who's converting it to turbines. He's had some ginormous problems because there's no room in the wings for fuel tanks. He's trying to stick the fuel tank in the fuselage and get the fuel flow to work and everything. He has not worked full time on this because he has 3 other $15,000 turbines he flies all over the world. And he doesn't want me to share his name or any of the pictures he sent me on this until it is maiden and flying. And then he says, Damon, you can share it. But if it doesn't work, I don't want anybody to know. Oh, and the B-36 became a static model for a guy that was going to build a aviation-based restaurant. But the crazy thing is I haven't heard from him since COVID started. And he doesn't answer his emails anymore. So I'm really nervous maybe something happened to the guy. And that B-36 is sitting somewhere, and maybe some wife's going to sell it at a garage sale or something, because I'll buy the B-36 back. But, yeah, but that's really what's going on, everybody. So, look, I wanted to just share what the MSL2 cost to build. But here's some ways, because in this email, my follower friend said, you know, how can I figure out how to afford to do these? Because I really want to design my own airframes and all this stuff. Here's some realities for you, okay? And if you know me, I love the Ted Lasso slogan where he says, be curious but don't judge. So you can be curious why that person owns a Lamborghini, but don't judge them for owning a Lamborghini, because for all you know, they've worked since they were 16. And their knuckles are bloody from working their whole lives, and they deserve that Lamborghini, okay? So I don't judge anybody, folks. But I know about 25 years ago, I was raising my son living in a one-bedroom apartment and trying to build a model airplane on my kitchen table because I had lost everything in a divorce, and I mean everything. I still had my balls, but I lost everything else. But the thing is that you can make money off YouTube. I mean, I'm only making 50 to 100 a month, but 50 to 100 a month pays for gas. My Patreon, where I share all of my designs. I mean, I used to give away all my designs for free until people started stealing my designs and selling them as their own. So I went out and stopped all those people from doing it, brought all my designs into a Patreon, and for like $5 or $6 a month, you can download all of my designs. And then I have a sponsorship that I might make $50 or $100 a month off of. So, you know, you end up in $200, $250 a month. That's a huge amount of money that helps me with my hobby. And anybody can do it. There's nothing special about me. Another thing is, if you'd like to build kits, you can build airframes for people and make some pretty good money. If you look at the Zeroli drawings, if you look at the Don Smith drawings, I've had a couple of people reach out to me on the Don Smith drawings and says, you know, Damon, I know you don't like to build, but would you build this? There's some things in the Don Smith drawings that you need to modify, because there's just some wonky things in the drawings that I wouldn't do it that way, and I warn my clients I wouldn't do it that way, and they say, hey, do it however you want, Dag. Zerolis are pretty much, you can build it as is. They're really good drawings. But the thing is if you build an airframe for a person, you can make some serious money. Now, you're going to give up 6 months or 4 months. Keep in mind, framing up an airframe to me, I can literally do in 2 months. It's the installing the radio, it's making the ailerons work, making all the other, putting the hinges and everything. If you're just going to build an airframe for a person and hand it to them, you can make decent money. You can make $300 or $400 really quick doing that. So if you're trying to figure out a way to do things in the hobby that you just can't take out of your week-to-week paycheck, there are paths out there to do it, but it takes a while. Okay, it does take years. Like I said, no airplane I've ever built, I normally gets into the air in less than 3 years. And then there's one last thing, and this is kind of like, oh well, gosh, Dad, you kept me all excited until you told me the last big steaming turd fact. It's taken me 21 years to collect all of my stuff that I build with. My lathe, my mill, my TIG welder, all of this stuff has taken me a ginormous amount of time, because people will sometimes look at my shop and say, oh my God, you got all these great tools. I see 21 years of looking in newspapers for lathes that are basically going to be thrown away, and I restore them. Or selling the C-130 is what helped me buy my TIG welder. So there are a lot of things I have in my shop that I acquired from selling other things too. I just didn't build airframes. That's one reason a lot of people reach out to me to TIG weld landing gear for them, or a lot of people reach out to me to make prop adapters for them coming off a motor on one of my lathes. I do that on the side, and I make a little bit of money doing that too. So there are ways to not have to use your daughter's college funds to afford to fly model airplanes. And then you just got rich people that, you know, somebody says, you know, well, you know, Damon, do you think that you're rich? And I'm like, well, compared to Elon Musk, I'm probably in poverty. It's all relative, folks. It's whatever you can do, but I want you to try to do it, okay? I don't think model aviation is quite as addictive as gambling, because hopefully you don't crash that much. There's such a reward in it. And that's another thing. And I need to shut this video down. I could babble for hours about this subject. If you're a good pilot and you have a good pre-flight checklist and you don't fly stupid, you can have airframes last 10, 15 years. My MSL-1's airframe is now 15 years old. Now, I haven't flown it for 4 years because it's in storage. But I have 1,350 flights on the MSL-1 and only one dead stick landing. And that's where I had batteries that the internal resistance was so high, the batteries, the voltage dropped to like 2.5 volts about 45 seconds into the flight. And it was sheer luck that I landed the airplane without destroying it. But now I check my internal resistance. So yeah, everybody, that's it for this video. I always end the videos by saying, please take a kid flying. I'm actually doing a video about some people that reached out to me that were bullied, kids that want to fly FPV, kids that want to fly drones. Keep in mind, I've been in this hobby long enough to remember when everybody hated gliders. I used to fly FM radios. People are pretty, and I don't like to use the word stupid, because in my YouTube I try to stay positive. But it used to be, if you belonged to a club, there'd be a roster. On that roster it'd have like my name. Next to it it'd have what radios I have and what channels I have. So if you don't remember FM radios, you had the radio in your hand, a big antenna, and you had a flag, but you would put your number on your antenna. You also, when you went to fly at the club, would put, they had a clip, a board, a frequency board. You would put number, I had 16 at first, channel 16. I'd put channel 16 on the clipboard. So if anybody went to fly, they'd have to use 16, because they turned their 16 radio on, they'd shoot my airplane down. That's what we called getting shot down. And I did get shot down a couple of times, where people were silly. They didn't check the board. They just turned on the radio. But because we knew what everybody's frequencies was, if you had a glider, you'd go out and get channel like 17 or 19. I ended up getting channel 19 because nobody at the club had a channel 19. A very good friend of mine that was a glider pilot had bought, I think, 17. He was up for 20 minutes, and these old farts, these dinosaurs, relics, I mean, best friends of Thomas Edison, said, boy, he's hogging that channel for 20 minutes. He's up there thermaling. And I looked at them. I said, what channel are you on? And they're like, 26. I'm like, he bought 17 specifically so he's not stepping on anybody else's frequencies. I felt like saying, shut up. But people always complain about the gliders and then the helicopters. Oh my God, those helicopters are going to crash into the pits and kill people. A Husqvarna, look, a G62, Quadra 42, or one of those Husqvarna gas engines going into the pits at 85 mile an hour, turning a 24-inch prop, is going to kill somebody just as fast as a helicopter. So there are going to be people, there are going to be dickheads and Karens out there that want to hate no matter what. So the thing is that they're now aiming their focus on quads, drones, FPV, and that's a younger crowd of people most of the time. And believe it or not, I've gotten like 24 emails from these people, and I'm going to do a video on them. Now, I'm not going to call out these dickhead and Karen's names. That's my new phrase, dickheads and Karens. But the reality is, we need to get the youth into model aviation. There's a son and dad. Son's 10, dad's, I don't know, 30-something, I think. Will never join the AMA again, and will never join a club again because of the way they are treated. And I said, don't blame the AMA. He's like, it's an AMA club. Don't blame the AMA. Clubs are clubs, and they're always going to have dickheads and Karens. AMA is a great organization to belong to. But I'm preaching again, and I was told the other day, Dad, you preach too much. You're too goody-goody. I don't like goody-goody people. Great, kiss my ass. But here's the reality. We have to get the youth into model aviation. We have to get the kids into it, okay? So if you're still hanging around listening to me babble, you must like what I'm saying. But I always end these videos with a little bit of an editorial talking about getting youth into model aviation. They're 6 years old and up. Get them a Gillows glider, get them a little rubber powered Gillows, get them whatever can get the kids into aviation and away from video games where they're driving 68 Camaros down the sidewalk killing everybody. That's not good for a 6-year-old, okay? What's good is science, physics, aviation, and all the cool things we can do. So rock on, everybody. I'll see you next time. Sorry for getting chatty, and take a kid flying and be cool, okay? Just be nice to each other. Rock on. Bye.